Hello, you absolute legends. If you've watched some of my other videos, you'll know that GoldenEye speedrunners haven't always been the most welcoming to new techniques and strategies. So I thought it would be fun to go back and have a look at some of the more controversial discoveries that caused a bit of a stir in the community. It would be really interesting to hear what people outside of GoldenEye speedrunning think about these techniques as well. Do you think they should be banned? Are they completely legit? We would love to hear your thoughts. On a more serious note, I would really appreciate it if you could support me on Patreon. I'm not sure if you're aware, but there have been a few speedrunning channels that have been demonetized lately for really bizarre reasons. I am completely reliant on YouTube ad revenue to survive, and the thought of YouTube taking that away is really stressful, so it would really mean a lot to me if I had your support on Patreon. The link is in the description. Thanks, guys. For the first technique, we're going to go all the way back to the year 2000. Perfect Dark had just been released, and there was a huge influx of new speedrunners. One of the Perfect Dark players was a gentleman that went by the nickname Snapdragon. He is a certified genius and world-renowned problem solver and programmer. On the 25th of October, he made a forum post titled, "Some Very Bad News for 1.1 Users." In his post, he outlined why the 1.1 control style was provably slower than 1.2. I'll try to explain it as quickly as I can, but the problem comes from the fact that with 1.1, the control stick is used for both moving forward and turning. This means that in order to turn, you need to sacrifice forward movement given that the control stick moves in a circular fashion. With 1.2, forward movement is done using a button, completely separate from the control stick. This means that you can turn fully while still keeping full forward momentum. This gets way worse when you realize that in GoldenEye, it takes several seconds to reach top speed. And as soon as forward momentum is ceased, top speed is completely lost and needs to be rebuilt. So basically, with 1.1, every single time you turn, you lose full speed. This was a pretty big deal, because in the year 2000, almost every GoldenEye speedrunner was using 1.1, and had been for years. It's understandable, as 1.1 is the default setting. Now here comes the controversial technique. You can overcome this disadvantage by setting the neutral position of the control stick to completely down. When the control stick goes back to the center, the game thinks you are holding up and Bond will automatically move forward. When this is done, you can turn left and right and it won't impact the forward momentum at all. Speedrunners now call this technique cruise control, or CC for short. There was actually already a player using this technique, in secret, and that was a player by the name of Wouter Jansen. Wouter Jansen would go on to become the GoldenEye champion between the years of 2001 and 2003. He claimed that he had been using cruise control because he had a very loose control stick and basically needed to do it in order to get top speed at all. When the other top players found this out, they were understandably upset, as they had been playing at a huge disadvantage the entire time. In a topic called "Post Here If You Think Cruise Control is Cheating," there were posts by some pretty heavy-hitting players, including the world champion at the time, Sterling Neblett. But their arguments against it were pretty weak. For example, one player said, "This style was not programmed into the game, so that is why I think it's cheating," which is a pretty ironic thing for a speedrunner to say, as we almost never complete games as they were intended. Ultimately, while there was some backlash, there was never any legitimate reason to ban the technique, and its use was never disallowed. The resistance to cruise control was likely entirely emotional, possibly summed up best by a post stating, "After seeing Wouter using cruise control, I believe it is cheating." Cruise control isn't used anywhere near as much these days, as the 1.2 control style is almost universally chosen by speedrunners. As overall, it is a far superior style, allowing players to look up and down much quicker than 1.1. The next discovery happened in 2008 and involved a new version of the game that was found to be advantaged on certain levels. On October 22nd, the speedrunner Patrick Nilsson created a topic titled "Major Advantage Find, NTSC-J." He outlined the fact that the Japanese version of GoldenEye had many more body armors than the standard NTSC and PAL versions. Most levels are unaffected by this, but it makes a huge difference on Cavern's 00 Agent. Previously, Cavern's 00 Agent was arguably the hardest level in the game to survive when using the world record strategy. There were no body armors at all, and you were basically forced to run past a slew of guards and simply hope for the best. It's pretty hard to portray in words just how terrible the level was to play. In the Japanese version of the game, there are 2 body armors directly in the path of the existing strategy. This made surviving very easy, and was a complete swing in the opposite direction. It was immediately obvious that the existing world record on Caverns Double O Agent was about to be destroyed. Several players were upset that the Japanese version made Caverns so much easier to play, and went so far as saying it was cheating. I'm not sure entirely where this idea came from, but it was assumed that the body armors were a mistake or oversight by the developers. Some people wanted the Japanese version to be banned completely, while others suggested that it should be separated into its own rankings. Nowadays, using different versions of games to get an advantage is common practice in speedrunning. Japanese versions are often used because the text is displayed faster on screen. Almost universally, this is seen as a normal thing and has become standard. But back in the 2000s, speedrunning was still extremely niche, and communities had not completely formulated best practices. It's understandable that there was some debate about the authenticity of using the Japanese version. But as history has shown, it was allowed to be used on the main rankings, and there is no differentiation between versions. The next controversial technique stemmed from a discovery that happened in 2010. On the 1st of February on a TAS forum, a player by the name of Datel237 outlined a way to start each level at full speed by using the 2.4 control style. 2.4 is a control style that uses 2 controllers instead of 1. The new strategy takes advantage of a glitch that allows inputs to be made during cinemas using the second controller. This can be humorously used to kill guards during opening cinemas, or even Baron Samedi in the closing cinema of the Egyptian level. When I previously spoke about cruise control, I mentioned that it takes several seconds for Bond to reach top speed. Normally, this means that at the beginning of each level, Bond runs at a slightly slower pace. Given that movement is controlled by the second controller when using 2.4, it can take advantage of the glitch to trick the game into thinking that Bond is running even while the cinema is playing. So by the time the level starts, Bond has already built momentum. This time save isn't free though, as you'll be forced to play the rest of the level with 2 controllers, which is much harder than using 1. So even though theoretically this technique saves time on most levels, speedrunners generally only use it for these simpler levels. It also dramatically impacted the level depot, where speedrunners could use the glitch to shoot out a screen during the opening cinema. This is actually part of an objective, so there is an immediate time save there. But it also causes guards to open a large roller door that usually takes more than 2 seconds to open. All in all, this saved 3 seconds on the Secret Agent and 00 Agent difficulties, completely obsoleting the previous records. Players were really not happy when this was discovered, but there were no calls to ban this new strategy. It was something that this new control style allowed players to do that was far more contentious. You see, with the 2.4 control style, movement is done completely with the control stick on the second controller. And some levels are so simple that they can be played without a single strafe change. This means that the control stick is in the same position for the entire run. To make life simple, speedrunners began to use rubber bands to hold the stick in place. Now a player wouldn't even need to hold the second controller, which makes things a lot easier. Some players even use the rubber bands on levels involving strafe changes, where they let the rubber band do the work for one strafing direction and use their thumb for the other. Several players thought this technique should be banned, as in their opinion this would count as hardware modification or tool assistance. Players also realized though that this would be extremely hard to regulate. Short of requiring hand cams for every record, there would be no way to tell if someone was actually using a rubber band. The final consensus was that while the technique was generally frowned upon, there was no way to moderate it, so it was never officially banned. Over time, it has become a standard technique that most speedrunners use on levels that don't require strafe changes, like Streets Agent and Caverns Agent. Thankfully, on the more complex 2.4 levels, rubber bands aren't used and inputs are done completely by hand. I want you to remember that while there are definitely speedrunners who dislike change, all of these techniques were accepted and are completely okay to use. So as a whole, I think the community does not prohibit legitimate ideas. Of course, there was also the look-down technique that was found in 2002 by the 55-year-old speedrunner John Colita. I did an entire video on that discovery, so I won't cover it again here, but I'll put a link to it on screen for you to watch. Click on my channel icon to subscribe. I have some epic videos coming up in the very near future. I hope that you are having a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next video.